Norse myth doesn't start with a single throne in the sky, but with a vast ash tree called Yggdrasil. Its branches and roots support many worlds: Asgard for the gods, Midgard for humans, Jötunheim for giants, and more. Thor's story unfolds in a cosmos already crowded with neighbors, borders, and threats. Asgard is the realm of the Aesir, the warrior gods like Odin and Thor, while Midgard is the ring-shaped world of humans, surrounded by dangerous seas. For the Norse, the middle world feels exposed: storms from above, raids from the sea, giants and monsters beyond its borders. That tension makes a protector god feel not just impressive, but necessary. At the head of the Aesir stands Odin, a god of kings, poets, and the dead. He is always searching for hidden knowledge, thinking about big strategies and planning for the distant doom called Ragnarök. Odin's mind is on the long game, which leaves room for another god to focus on immediate physical threats. In Norse myth, giants are not just villains. They are an older, raw force of nature. Some are wise, some foolish, some violent. They live in harsh mountains and icy wastes beyond Midgard, pushing at the edges of the gods' order. Thor's job is not to wipe them out, but to keep them from crashing into the middle world. For seagoing farmers and traders in the north, storms were double-edged. Thunderclouds could bring rain that fed crops, but also winds that sank ships and flattened roofs. A storm god in this world is not simply cruel or kind. He is a power that can help or hurt depending on how it is handled. Thor, the red-bearded thunder god, is Odin's son, and the most physically powerful of the Aesir. If Odin is a schemer and seer, Thor is the one who shows up with a hammer when giants or trolls threaten. Norse speakers called on his name before journeys and battles, trusting his strength more than anyone else's. Some myths say Thor rides a chariot drawn by two goats, Tangrisnir and Tangjoster. When he races across the sky, the wheels and hooves make thunder. For listeners, the rumble overhead becomes something familiar. Not just a random noise, but their favorite god driving to check on them. Odin fascinated kings, sorcerers, and poets. But Thor was the everyday favorite. He drank with humans and stories, protected farms, and fought enemies you could imagine living beyond the next ridge. For people who wanted safety more than secrets, Thor felt like the right god to wear around their neck on a hammer pendant. Thor is not distant or aloof. He eats enormous amounts, drains whole horns of ale, and seems happiest when there is a noisy hall to relax in after a giant fight. His appetites make him feel less like a distant principal, and more like a bigger, louder version of the people who told his stories. Thor can be quick to anger, and his hammer has flattened more skulls than we can count. Yet he also cares deeply for his family, friends, and the fragile middle world he guards. The mix of rough temper and steady loyalty is exactly what made him feel real and lovable to Norse audiences. One night, Loki sneaks up and cuts off Sif's golden hair as a prank. When Thor finds out, he is furious, not just because Loki hurt Sif, but because he stole something that symbolized growth and grain. Loki's mischief nearly tears the gods apart, until he promises to fix his mistake by seeking better gifts. To calm Thor, Loki goes down to the dwarves, master smiths of the Norse world. He challenges them to forge treasures so wonderful that the gods will forgive him. If they succeed, he gets out of trouble. If not, he risks his own head. Even here, Loki's tricks drive the plot toward new tools for the gods. The first dwarven brothers forge wonders for the gods: Odin's spear that never misses, a golden boar that can run through the sky, and a ship that can be folded up like cloth. Each gift shows how dwarves turn raw metal into magic, linking craft and power in Norse imagination. Loki also asks for replacement hair, for Sif hair, made of pure gold that will grow like real hair. The dwarves spin and hammer gold into living strands, turning a cruel joke into a symbol of restored honor and renewed fertility. Sif's new hair glows like ripe fields in the sun. A second pair of dwarves tries to outdo the first, forging more treasures under pressure. Loki, fearful they will win the wager, distracts them by biting one at a crucial moment. As a result, the hammer they forge, Mjölnir, ends up with a handle shorter than planned, but still powerful enough to shake giants. When the gifts are presented, the gods agree that, despite the flaw, Mjölnir is the greatest of them all. It never misses, always returns to Thor's hand, and can shrink or grow as needed. The hammer becomes the perfect symbol of a god whose job is to strike fast, hard, and reliably for Midgard. Thor immediately tests the hammer, hurling it at distant rocks and mountains. Each throw hits its mark, then whirls back into his grasp. The gods cheer, and even Loki smiles, though he is mainly relieved that his prank has turned into praise instead of punishment. Sif's new golden hair grows back as promised, cascading down her shoulders in living strands. Thor's rage cools when he sees her honor restored and his hammer acquired. Loki slips away from immediate danger, but the whole episode shows how chaos and craft can combine to arm the defender of Midgard. From this point on, Mjölnir is not just a tool of war. It hovers over weddings, blesses newborns, and consecrates boundaries and oaths. The hammer that shatters giants also marks new beginnings, turning Thor into both warrior and priest of a kind. The short handle of Mjölnir is not a simple mistake. It reminds listeners that even the greatest powers have quirks and limits. Thor's hammer is perfect enough to do its job, but imperfect enough to keep the story human-sized. In Norse myth, greatness and flaw often travel together. Most of Thor's work is not about one big battle, but about constant patrol. The myths picture him traveling between Asgard, Midgard, and the edges of Jötunheim, checking on giants, trolls, and other threats. He is less a distant king and more a roaming border guard. Instead of a horse, Thor often rides in a chariot pulled by two goats, Tungrisnir and Tungjoster. Each journey, he can slaughter and cook them for food, then resurrect them the next day, as long as their bones remain unbroken, making his travel kit an endless camp meal. Not all giant trouble happens in distant lands. Some stories hint at giants living near, or even among humans as dangerous neighbors. Thor's sudden arrivals and thunderclaps become a way to imagine those threats being pushed back from the edge of the field or fjord. Unlike Odin, who seeks rare wisdom, Thor likes good food, strong drink, and straightforward talk. This contrast matters. It sends a message that courage and decency do not require complicated rituals. Ordinary people could imagine sharing a bench with Thor far more easily than debating secrets with Odin. Thor has a family, his wife Sif and children like Magni, Madi, and Thrudr in different sources. The myths do not dwell on domestic scenes, but their presence keeps Thor from becoming just a wandering fighter. He has something to defend beyond abstractions, a home, a hearth, and generations. Many short tales simply mention Thor killing giants who threatened gods or humans. These stories rarely bother with detailed dialogue. For listeners, what mattered was that giants existed, and that someone reliable was on duty to stop them. Giants fear Thor, but they also respect him in a rough way. Some stories show them joking about him, planning traps, or trying to outwit him. The rivalry is not between a brainless Hulk and helpless victims, but between two kinds of power, wild size and disciplined strength. In a world of shifting alliances, tricky gods, and prophetic doom, Thor represents something unusual: reliability. He may arrive late, crash through the roof, or lose his temper, but he shows up. For Norse listeners, that counted for a lot. Thor's adventures often include jokes and slapstick moments. He misjudges tasks, gets tricked, or reacts in big, over-the-top ways. This humor does not weaken him. It makes the stories easier to remember and share. A god who can be laughed with is easier to love. Thor is not king of the gods, but he stands near Odin as the main defender of the Aesir and Midgard. Where Odin worries about fate and knowledge, Thor worries about today's storm or tonight's raid. Together they show two sides of power: planning and punching. Many of Thor's funniest and strangest stories begin with him traveling in the company of Loki. The two are opposites. Thor is straightforward and strong, Loki sly and slippery. Their journeys together create situations where raw power and trickery bump into illusions and riddles. On one journey, Thor and his companions find a huge hall in the wilderness, sheltered from the wind. They sleep there, only to realize in the morning that they spent the night inside a giant's glove. The world itself seems bigger and stranger than they thought. Eventually, the group reaches Utgardr, the outer fort of the giants, and meets Utgarda Loki, a powerful giant lord who loves tests. Instead of fighting Thor directly, he invites them into contests that look simple but are laced with illusions and magic. In one contest, Thor's human companion must eat faster than a giant named Loki. The mortal eats meat and bread, but the giant consumes food, bones, and even the trough. Only later do they learn that Loki is not a person at all, but a personification of wildfire. Something no human can beat. Thor's challenge is to lift a gray house cat from the floor. He strains and can only raise one paw. It looks like a humiliation until he learns that the cat is actually the Midgard serpent in disguise. The fact that he moved even part of it becomes impressive instead of shameful. In another challenge, Thor wrestles a frail old woman and cannot throw her down. She later reveals herself as old age itself, a force that no one, not even gods, can defeat. The story turns Thor's apparent failure into a lesson about the limits that even strength must accept. At the end, Loki reveals that every contest was an illusion. Fire, sea, age, and the World Serpent themselves. Thor did not fail. He nearly did the impossible. The giant sends them away, warning that he will not host them again. Thor leaves furious but also more aware of what he faces. The story of Loki shows that Thor's strength is huge, but not infinite. He cannot erase age, drink the whole sea, or casually lift a world serpent. Yet he comes close, and that nearly matters more. Norse myth respects effort and courage, even when the universe itself sets hard ceilings. On the surface, Thor's visit to Utgardr is funny. The mighty thunder god tricked into impossible tasks. Underneath, it is a philosophical fable about limits. The laughter pulls listeners in. The ideas about what cannot be beaten linger long after the jokes fade. Thor's path from Utgardr leads him back to his usual work of smashing giants. But every future storm, every hint of the World Serpent's coils below the sea, is colored by this experience. Heroism now means not just swinging a hammer, but knowing where even a god must stop. One morning, Thor wakes to discover that Mjölnir is gone. Without his hammer, Asgard feels suddenly vulnerable. The gods fear that giants have stolen their main weapon, and Thor feels naked without the tool that defines his role. The gods send Loki to investigate, lending him Freya's feather cloak so he can fly between worlds. Loki becomes a reluctant detective, using his wits to find out who is bold enough to steal Thor's hammer and what they want in exchange for it. Loki finds the hammer buried underground in the land of the giant Thrym. The giant agrees to return it only if Freya is brought to him as a bride. When Loki returns with the news, Freya is outraged, and the gods realize they need a different plan. After much debate, Heimdall suggests a wild solution. Thor should dress as Freya, veil and all, and go reclaim the hammer in disguise. Thor hates the idea, but the gods remind him that without Mjölnir, everyone is in danger. Reluctantly, the fiercest warrior agrees to play bride. Soon, Thor is stuffed into a bridal gown, veil pulled low, while Loki dresses as his maidservant. The disguise is ridiculous, but they hope that giants will be too focused on the wedding feast to notice details. Comedy and danger walk hand in hand toward Thrym's hall. At Thrym's hall, the giants notice that the bride eats and drinks far more than expected, devouring whole animals and barrels of ale. Loki explains that Freya was so eager for the wedding that she hasn't eaten in days. The giants accept the excuse, barely, as the feast barrels toward the hammer ceremony. To seal the marriage, Thrym orders Mjölnir brought into the hall and laid in the bride's lap for blessing. This is the moment Thor has been waiting for. Under the veil, his eyes flare with recognition as he feels the familiar weight. In that instant, the joke flips direction. Thor tears off the veil, stands up, and swings Mjölnir in a flash. The giants, who thought they were mocking the gods, suddenly realize they invited their worst enemy to dinner. The stolen hammer returns to its rightful owner in the most theatrical way possible. The poem describing this episode ends with Thor using Mjölnir to smash Thrym and his kin. For family-friendly retellings, the focus is on giants fleeing in panic and the restoration of the hammer. The important thing is that the weapon returns to the sky and giants learn to be more cautious. For Norse listeners, the stolen hammer tale offered everything at once: tension, disguise, giant foolishness, and the comforting idea that even when things go very wrong, Thor will eventually stand up, reveal himself, and get his hammer back. It is a myth about lost protection restored. Among Thor's foes, none looms larger than Jormungandr, the serpent that coils around Midgard and bites its own tail. Tossed into the sea as a child of Loki, it grows until its body circles the world. The line between sea and monster blurs. In one story, Thor visits the giant Hymir, and insists on going fishing. Hymir is nervous, knowing what might lurk in the deep, but Thor bullies his way into the boat anyway. The trip is framed as a contest of courage between giant and god on the open sea. To tempt something worthy out of the depths, Thor cuts off a cattle head and uses it as bait. This shocking detail shows how serious he is. Ordinary hooks will not catch a world serpent. The story leans into extremes to show a god pushing at cosmic boundaries. The bait sinks, and soon the line goes tight. Thor braces his feet against the boat and hauls with all his might. From below, Jörmungandr rises, its head and coils breaking the surface. For a moment, the World Serpent and the Thunder God glare at each other across the waves. Thor lifts Mjölnir, ready to smash the serpent's skull and change the world's fate early. But Hymir, terrified, cuts the line. The serpent falls back into the depths, and Thor's blow never lands. The story hangs on a near miss, a glimpse of the apocalypse that ends up postponed. Thor returns from the fishing trip angry but alive, and the serpent remains beneath the sea. For the Norse, this tale captures something familiar, the sense that the ocean always hides more danger than you can see, and that even a god can only keep it at bay for a time. Jörmungandr, wolves that chase the sun, and other monsters are not random. They sit at the edges of things, sea, sky, night. Thor's fights with them mark and defend those edges. The myths turn geography and fear into characters and battles. Every storm that flung lightning across the fjords could be told as Thor striking giants or the serpent. When thunder rolled over mountains, it was his chariot or hammer. These tales made the weather feel less arbitrary, more like a series of loud conversations between gods and their enemies. Norse myth does not promise a safe, endless world. Asirus reciting the poem Voluspa tells of Ragnarök, when Thor and Jörmungandr will kill each other. Thor's fans loved him knowing that his story has an ending. His courage is sharpened, not softened by the certainty of doom. At Ragnarök, Thor finally meets the serpent again. He kills Jörmungandr with his hammer, but takes only 9 steps before falling from its venom. The world will be remade, but without him. To love Thor is to love a protector who gives everything, including his last breath. Archaeology and later sources suggest that Thor had temples and outdoor altars across Scandinavia. Wooden pillars carved with hammer symbols, simple stone heaps, and sacred groves all served as points of contact. People asked for good weather, safe voyages, and protection from raids. Tiny Thor's hammer pendants have been found across the Viking world. Worn on necklaces or hung in houses, they served as pocket-sized Mjölnirs. Even as Christianity spread and crosses appeared, some people wore both symbols at once, hedging their bets between old and new protections. Many Scandinavian place names preserve Thor's presence: Thorslundr, Thorshof, and others. These names turn hills, groves, and settlements into reminders that the thunder god once had local ties. The god of storms was also the god of your particular valley. At assemblies where disputes were settled, people might swear by gods, including Thor, to tell the truth or keep agreements. The same hammer that smashed giants symbolically sealed contracts. In a culture with few written records, such oaths mattered a great deal. When Christianity spread through the north, Thor stayed stubbornly popular. Some sagas tell of people calling on Thor even as kings pushed the new faith. Over time, the hammer gradually gives way to the cross, but it does so slowly, leaving a long shadow. Even after official worship ended, tales of Thor lived on as folklore and stories. He became a figure in children's tales, a memory of a time when thunder spoke a different language. The god shrank in power, but grew in cultural durability. Today, Thor appears in comics, films, and games as a superhero. These versions change details, clothes, companions, even personality. But they keep a core idea: a strong, loyal figure who fights monsters with a hammer. The Norse Thor and the modern Thor share a mythic skeleton. Unlike distant creator gods, Thor walks, eats, drinks, and jokes his way through the stories. He is incredibly strong, but also hungry, grumpy, and sometimes fooled. Those flaws are exactly what make him feel like someone you could meet on a stormy night, not just a symbol. Thor knows he will die at Ragnarök, and that giants and monsters cannot all be destroyed. Yet he still fights, patrols, and responds when people call. For Norse thinkers, that kind of courage acting well despite no guaranteed happy ending is worth celebrating. Thor can be terrifying to giants, but for most humans he is a friend. He might scare you with thunder, yet he scares off worse things. In a harsh world of storms and raids, that difference between a feared tyrant and a fierce ally is everything. Looking back over Thor's tales, hammer forging, giant smashing, disguises, and near victories over the World Serpent, we see a pattern. He begins as a border brawler but grows into a beloved guardian. The rough fighter at the edge becomes the heart of everyday security. Zeus can feel like a single center of power, but Norse myth spreads power across different figures. Thor complements Odin, where one seeks wisdom and sacrifice, the other offers brute strength and cheerful presence. Together, they reflect the Norse idea that no one type of power is enough by itself. Thor's world of storms, giants, and feasts mirrors what Norse people knew. Harsh weather, dangerous neighbors, and the need for strong bonds at the hearth. He is not an escape from reality, but an amplified version of it, larger than life, yet not completely unlike it. The fact that Thor dies at Ragnarök means that even the strongest protector cannot shield the world forever. For Norse audiences, this was not hopelessness, but honesty. It encouraged them to value courage, loyalty, and humor in the face of loss, rather than relying on a guarantee of rescue. Even for those who no longer believe in Thor as a literal god, his stories still work as tools. They help us talk about protection, rage, fairness, and the stubborn choice to keep defending what we love. Mythic figures can be useful long after their temples close. Many cultures have thunder gods, Indra, Perun, Tyrannus, and more. Thor fits this family, but with a distinctly Scandinavian personality. Farmer's friend, giant smasher, and future victim of the World Serpent. Seeing him in this wider context highlights both shared human fears and local creativity. Thor gets angry quickly, and his hammer solves many problems with a hit. But his stories also show the limits of pure smashing. Illusions that he cannot see through, monsters that cannot be killed early, and futures he cannot avoid. Anger is powerful, but it is not enough by itself. Thor's willingness to be the butt of jokes wearing a dress, being tricked by giants, makes him unusual among powerful figures. The myths invite listeners to laugh with him as much as at him, turning fear into something manageable. Laughing at the god who defends you is a strangely intimate act. In chibi form, Thor looks cute and manageable, but his storms are still huge. Shrinking the figure but keeping the scale of his world reminds us that stories are how we safely handle massive, scary forces. We make the god small so that we can better think about what he represents. Our tiny storytellers remind us that Thor is more than a superhero with a hammer. He is a reflection of a world where storms, enemies, and endings are real, but so are loyalty, laughter, and stubborn courage. By following his travels from Asgard's halls to Midgard's farms and the final clash with the World Serpent, we glimpse how Norse minds made sense of a hard, beautiful world, and the protectors they hoped were watching the sky.